Good evening, everyone. The time is 5:01 p.m. and the Belton School District Board of Trustees are now convened in a workshop on Monday, February the 2nd, 1996. A quorum of board members is present. This meeting has been duly called and notice of the meeting has been posted in accordance with Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. First item on the agenda is public comments. I believe we have one. Is that right?
Yes, we just stepped out in the hallway.
Okay.
I don't know. Marty's in.
They go to the restroom.
Okay, we have one individual signed up for public comments. Apparently he stepped out in the hall. So let's recess for just a moment. Okay, we're back on the record. Note for the record, there was no discussion on any item on the agenda during our recess. It appears we have one individual that is signed up for public comment. Mr. Jose Martinez, is that you, sir? Okay. All right, sir, let me read something into the record before you begin, all right? In accordance with District Policy BED Local, any person wishing to address the Board of Trustees during public comments shall sign up before the meeting. In order to comply with the Texas Open Meetings Act, the board may not respond to comments or otherwise discuss or act upon any issues that are not posted on the meeting agenda. Participants will be allotted 3 minutes for public comments regarding items on the agenda. We have a timer on the screen that shows your allotted time and should sound when will occur at the conclusion. The board shall not tolerate disruption of the meeting by members of the public. Sir, I've already called your name. If you would, before you begin, please identify yourself and provide us with the city of your residence.
Yeah.
And you may begin at any time.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I'm Jose, excuse me, Jose Martinez. And even though I live in Temple, I've been teaching throughout this area all the way from kindergarten through college, actually graduate school even, so for 35 years or so. And the main thing, to put it as simply as I can, is that I've, over the past several months, I think it is, might be mistaken about the time frame, there's been a reference to something about the libraries here, the librarians or library situation. And by that I mean very simply that some have been, I guess, criticized, or rather, there seems to be, in 2 or 3 words or so, a censoring of some material. So basically that's what I was pointing out, that I'm concerned about that as an educator overall. And that's basically what the main concern I have, that wouldn't be the case, shouldn't be the case. And one other quick thing that also I emphasize more so than anything else, as librarians who know basically about libraries and the policies and how, and I guess they get certificates or degrees, like I do. I have a teaching certificate also, not as a librarian though. So anyway, I think they know basically their duties and what they're supposed to do versus others, be it teachers, be it administrators or anybody else. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. All right, sir, you can step back and take a seat out in the audience if you would. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, that brings us to item 3 on the agenda, board workshop, 2025-2026 board or budget workshop. Dr. Coleman?
Yes, thank you all so much for being here, and we are, just for the whole board to know, I'm going to monitor our time and try to get you out in time for the student showcase. We have a very unique student showcase in the whole board meeting tonight, so I'll be watching the time. Thank you for allowing some of our cabinet team members to be a part of this workshop. So you see Gabby, Mike Morgan, Melissa, and Todd have joined us. So I'm going to jump in, and I'm going to quickly take us back to, really, it was March, I think it was March 25th of 2024. So that was the very first board workshop that I did with you as a board and with me as, I think I became superintendent about 3 days later. The purpose of that board workshop was we always, in the past, I think the district had had a habit of board workshops leading up to the development of the next year's budget. This board workshop was really to highlight what we could see were some real challenges in particularly Belton ISD's budget, but we were hearing similar challenges across our state with public school finance. And so in that meeting, talked about several of the conditions that were impacting, how it was manifesting itself in Belton. So we talked about, and as most people know, basic allotment is a primary funding mechanism within Texas school finance. At that time when we had that conversation, the basic allotment had not changed since 2019. We talked about the impact that the record inflation was having on, certainly we all know that as members in our own households, but also how that was impacting the district. I had also shared with you that we had received a letter from the federal government that our federal funding, particularly our SHARS funding, had overnight cut in half. So for Belton ISD, that was around 1.3 million. We also, at that time, were waiting on comptroller values because, as you know, the templates were struggling. The financial templates for the state were struggling to catch up with the homestead exemption laws that were being passed. So those values were coming up. Also had shared with you average daily attendance, which we are not funded purely based on enrollment. It's your average daily attendance of the students enrolled. We had at that point not yet returned to pre-pandemic levels in our attendance. We also talked about the impact of student demographics, and what I mean by that is you'll often hear it referred to as weighted average daily attendance, WADA, and those are the weight amounts that are given to students based on the needs they have in a school system. And that's why you can see a reasonable swing in why some school district can get several $1,000s more per student than another school district. And so we talked about those things all impacting Belton ISD, and that our enrollment was slowing. So we had been a fast growth school district as determined by the state of Texas, had grown exponentially during COVID, and we're seeing, while at that point still growing, that growth was slowing down substantially as it has across our state. And so these were the conditions we were talking about in that board meeting in March of 24. So the next slide I'm going to talk to you about, that really is when I started the conversation with y'all about we had to start reducing expenditures in Belton ISD based on all of those factors we just talked about. We could no longer adopt a budget shortfall. We were also butting up against the policy and the requirements for fund balance and maintaining a healthy fund balance. Within our policy, it is between 20 to 25%. We're within policy. Best practice for the state of Texas that's recommended is you keep about 2.5 months worth of operating expenses in that fund balance. And so we were not in a position where we could continue to have those deficit budgets. And so so March of 24, you see, and y'all had already adopted, we had adopted what we projected would be a $5 million deficit that year. That was in August of 23 when that budget was adopted. We also talked about that was not a long runway. Coming in March, coming in that time period was not a long runway to impact 24, 25. And it certainly, we were 3/4 of the way through the 23, 24 school year, so it was going to be really hard to impact reductions for 23, 24. But we got to work on it, and we did. We were able to, through just studying every single position that was vacant, really being cautious about which positions that we moved forward with hiring during that spring semester. Also doing a lot of awareness. We went to every single campus and did a presentation on the budget. We did budget videos. Manuel and I did a budget video with Melissa, really trying to just build awareness. There also was just a slowing in spending on campus and department budgets that helped with that $500,000 reduction even in the 23-24 school year. Now y'all know from past audits, the actual deficit came in lower than the projected $5 million, came in at $3.9 million. So also during that time, in that March to August time period of 24, we also knew we had to impact the 24-25 budget. So started to work with our campuses and district departments, and we were able to identify going into that 24-25 school year about $6.5 million worth of expenditure reductions going into that budget. Now, if you remember, we were projecting a potential $13 million deficit at that point in time. So that $6 million, when we made those reductions going into 24, 25, that consisted of central office staff, educational aid positions, non-teaching campus professionals, campus support staff, custodial staff. We also really held to our staffing guidelines. We were overstaffed at campus level, so really pulling in and aligning to what were the staffing guidelines at the time. Reduced campus budgets by 10%. Department budgets were cut somewhere between 25 to 30%, and it depended on the department. Some departments weren't able to make those cuts because utility costs and insurance costs were going up. We also did some deferments, so paused on some things that we knew we couldn't eliminate, but could we wait another year and see what was coming on 25, 26. And we also had a grant. We had a safety and security grant that allowed us to defer about a little over $400,000 to that grant for some of our safety and security. So that made up the $6.9 million. Also, if you recall, going into that school year, we also, based on the rising percent of our students receiving special education services, we also added special education teaching staff. So, and also going in 24, 25, insurance costs, property insurance costs went up and utility costs went up. So you adopted an $8.2 million projected deficit budget. It actually came in, when it was all said and done through the audit process, at a $2 million deficit. So we're starting to see the actual deficit go down. That was planning going into 24, 25. What we also did in the fall of 24 is you approved the commissioning of a budget advisory committee. That committee was made up of students, parents, teachers, community, district staff members. Many board members popped into those meetings, and through that process, that is where we identified the reductions that would be used going into the 25-26 budget. And so about a year ago was when I presented what those recommendations were. They included further reduction to department local budgets, campus local budgets, pulling us closer to that staffing guideline that we published for our people-teacher ratio staffing. We continue to reduce central office staff, implemented energy conservation plans. We did program evaluations. We did a PEMS audit. We had a staffing audit conducted by TASB in order to, was it TAS or TASB? I'm sorry, TASB. All with the intent of looking at what are further ways that we can reduce our expenditures in the district. All of that was what led into the $5.8 million reduction going into 25-26. What also happened in adopting the budget in 25-26 is because we also had our county and area had been declared a disaster area, we were able to get approximately $2.1 million in a one-time support for addressing the damage that we had received through those storms. So with that, we were able to, and you were able to, adopt a balanced budget for the 25-26 school year. And so the rest of this presentation, so I'm going to stop, get questions that you might have. We're going to then go into, because you also know we've been already projecting, you passed the budget in August, we already were working on, so what is 26-27? Because also in there, and part of what helped us start to bring down that deficit was in the last legislative session, we were very fortunate and House Bill 2 passed, and we also received additional state funding. This would be a totally different conversation had that not happened. So incredibly thankful for that. That also has helped further bring down the projected deficit budget for Belton ISD. But we held on some of those budget reductions. If you remember March of 25, we talked about budget reductions in phases. Phase 3 came out of our budget advisory committee. We held on that because we wanted to see what was going to happen in the legislative session. And again, we're very thankful we got additional funding. It did not, however, completely eliminate the gaps that we have for our budget. And so that's why we have, through our board budget committee and in budget workshops already this year, have been forecasting and looking out at the 26-27 school year. So you're not being asked to take action. You will take action in August on the 26-27 school year budget, but we have to begin that work in order to move forward with the goals that the board had talked about in y'all's last workshop around moving us further towards maintaining balanced budgets, as well as being able to look at how do we stay competitive with compensation for our staff, how do we make sure we're increasing funding. The loss of that Proposition A for us is impacting this year's budget, but it'll also impact future budgets. So how do we make sure there's more funding? That was one of your goals, increase funding in capital projects budgets. So all of that to say, we're not asking for approval of a budget, but we wanted to update you on where we are in terms of working towards the reductions for the 26-27 school year. So that was a lot. So I want to stop for a minute and see what questions do you have before we go into our next slide, which is starting to look at still 25-26, but that outlook of 26-27.
I have a couple. Can you go back one slide? So looking at this, you've been in education for a while, and that seems like a whole lot of variables that our district has had to adjust to just to come to terms where we are as a budget right now. Has there ever been a time like this in your memory, really any of yours, where we've had to adjust to this many things at one time in this short of number of years?
I mean, we always know comptroller values come out in February. You're adopting a projected budget. Usually your templates are fairly accurate. This is a real shifting landscape in terms of homestead exemptions, and Melissa can talk about that better, but that has really made that a difficult variable. We've always had to make sure we pay attention to, we need students in school, and we know that there was a significant hit in attendance across the nation, across the state and schools. So that was not an expected. Nobody expected COVID. Nobody expected that we would take that kind of a swing in average daily attendance. But that in the past had been more predictable. You know, best prediction of that is past years, but COVID really swung that number. Enrollment, we have projections. We've always been able to bring projections. It still is a little bit of it's not quite crystal ball. There's a lot of science to it, but there's a lot of variables. I would say the things that impacted us the most was the rising costs associated with inflation, the changing templates in terms of comptroller values, and no, I've never seen where a school district gets a letter and overnight your federal funding drops by 50%. I personally have never experienced that. Melissa, any other?
No,
In
we're
your
used to
experience?
basic allotment remaining pretty steady. Historically, the state of Texas enrollment was always growing, and so there weren't budgetary pressures per se. Estimating comptroller values, for the most part, became pretty standard. You could kind of follow your growth and kind of project that out, but again, the increases in homestead exemption have definitely changed the way of doing that, and it's, before we would have maybe 4 or 5 values you had to try to project. We're getting into double digits now as they layer those hold harmlesses into that, so it's becoming very complex. And for the most part, yeah, there's always been the threat of decreased federal funding in regards to like Title I or your Idea Bs, but not in SHARs up to this point. But I think that was something that happened in the past, and they just surprised us with that. So, but yeah, not used to this many variables.
Melissa, along with Rucker was saying, the changing conditions, of course, there have been some unfunded mandates all through that time period, right?
Yes, sir.
That are not up there.
Yeah,
right?
I know, just as we were getting ready to adopt the 24-25 budget, in the session last minute was the mandate of armed security officers at every
Right,
campus. And so
right.
I remember plugging about $1 million into the budget.
And of course, we
just
also
to-
opened 3 campuses in that time period,
Yes,
did we not?
yeah, and so
Which adds a
as
significant
well,
amount of fixed
right.
costs.
So to staff those campuses and
Right.
supplies, and yes, sir.
Actually, it's more than that. Since 2019, Mike, can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, since 2019, we've had the 6 campuses open. So one was an existing building at BMS, but it did move back into a standalone, so you have all the administrative staffing costs with that. And then 3 elementary schools, and then Lake Belton High School as well during that time. So.
And no increase in funding throughout that entire time period.
Right, until recently.
Until the last
Until
budget
recently,
this
right.
past session, yes,
The,
sir.
the other thing we don't know is, we don't know what the special ed funding is gonna be yet, do we? Okay.
Not yet.
That should have been its own variable. That is very unique. We were funded this year based on how we had been funded
Current law, yeah.
in current law for special education weighted funding. We are not still sure yet when we will find out how the new tiered system of funding for special education is going to impact us. We don't have that information yet.
Is there an estimated time frame of when we'll know?
Could be late summer, by the time we get to, yeah, I know there's.
We
all
were
of
here in
the-
spring, and then the determining the formula for that has proven to be very significantly more challenging than anticipated. The model proposed in theory is based on the needs of every single student. Within individual districts, the way you assess those needs are so dynamic that I think it's proven to be a huge challenge. And so there's not we will receive by this date that we're aware of, but do know that they're actively working on it.
When that does come through in the end of the summer, do we get additional funds at that time, or when would
Yeah,
that happen?
once they build the formulas, yeah, there would be a settle up,
So
at
we'd have
the end
some
of
funds-
that
some funds
budget year
retroactively?
in October, typically.
Okay, so the funds we'd receive would be for the 25-26 school year? In other words,
No,
if the
because,
formula's
well,
adopted
The
in
special
August.
ed funding,
Right.
the new special ed formulas would be in effect for 26-27.
Okay,
Gotcha.
we wouldn't receive any additional
Right.
funding for 25-26.
No.
Okay.
One other question. I mean, you mentioned we cut administrative staff, we cut custodial, $13 million, I think, over the last 3 years, on that other slide. And, our goal is to deliver high-quality education. We want to stay competitive with our payment of our teachers and staff. Anything else we could have done? Not that we want to necessarily, but, you're trying to make this tough decision of cutting $13 million while still providing the best education we can.
Anything else we could have done in terms of additional reductions.
Yeah, within the budget.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of strategies brainstormed in the Budget Advisory Committee process. The Phase 3 reductions that we talked about a year ago, with those reductions moving forward, then in terms of just those kind of expenditures, we will have gone through every single one of those recommendations. There certainly are additional things that districts can do if the capacity in their buildings allow. I mean, there are school districts all across the state that are closing schools. So that is a strategy that some school districts, if they have made every cut they can possibly make, those are hard decisions that some school districts are making across the state. We certainly have looked at revenue generating ideas as well. One of the things that I didn't mention, but that the team worked on, was getting, if you bring CTE courses down to the middle school level, and I would say it was done not just for funding purposes, but it was also done because it was appropriate for our middle school students to do that. That gets you additional funding. So those strategies, that's why we did the PEMS audit and really looked at, are we maximizing every dollar? Are we coding everything and not missing something so that the weighted funding that we should be getting for our students based on their needs, we're actually getting? Okay, we can always come back.
You know, timing's gonna be a significant factor in all of this. If you reduce too quick, I mean, you're gonna be more apt to affecting the classroom. So everything we're doing, obviously, is to maintain everything in the classroom, and reducing everything on the outside the classroom.
Well, that's why the Phase 3 last year, a year ago, we held on.
Right.
Because there were so many unknowns, particularly going into the legislative session. That is why we held on that. You know, what we also know is that everything we do in a school district impacts the classroom. The things that have been reduced are not things that throughout the history of a school district people did not feel were important. They were valuable roles. They were roles that had purpose and meaning both on the campus level and district level. But we could not continue to maintain those kind of expenditures in this kind of a budget climate and be able to bring in a balanced budget. I'm gonna jump to the next one, but we can come back. Please stop us with your questions. So Melissa's gonna walk us through these columns, and I'm gonna kick it to her for a few minutes.
Okay. So, as you were all aware, for the 25-26 budget, we were able to adopt those additional 3.17 pennies, which were disaster pennies for those May 2024 storms. Projected average daily attendance for the current school year was adopted at 12,633 based on demographer projections. That would be, I believe, 93% if you were to take average daily attendance of the 12,633 as the numerator over enrollment, okay? And that's usually how we try to project what ADA, that's kind of how we track ADA budgetarily.
I'm gonna stop you just a quick
Not
second.
necessarily how it's calculated for template and school finance purposes.
Yeah, and we did go a little bit more aggressive on our ADA. You know, instead of, you know, our past trends, we usually, one of the assumptions the board adopts is usually a percentage that's aligned with past percentages of ADA. We were a little bit more aggressive on that this year. I feel like this was the year to do that because our campuses are working so hard on attendance. Now, the flu and being out for 3 days with snow and ice, I guess is a better way, is impacting us, but we are starting to see an improvement in attendance. And again, I credit that to the hard work of our campuses.
So you can see there that we were able to adopt a balanced budget. With the addition of those disaster pennies, we also were able to build in a comfort level in the contracted services for those storm damages that we have to address this spring. And I know we've got some folks that are currently trying to get quotes on those damages. And Mike, I believe we had, what, $3 million in storm damages?
That was the insurance
Total,
estimate.
yeah, insurer's estimate. And so, of course, we had already addressed probably about $500,000 in the previous school year of some of those damages, especially in the area of athletics. But again, still have those damages that need to be addressed, and so that'll give us the cash flow and the ability to do that until everything settles with the insurance. So moving forward, as we look into 26, 27, we have to peel those disaster pennies back off of our tax rate. And then, of course, we're projecting an average daily attendance of 12,644. So really pretty flat increase in ADA, only 11 kids. And then you can see the impact to the revenue from the reduction of those disaster pennies. Okay, so even that 11 kids in ADA isn't significant enough to really swing revenues for us. So if using the 25-26 expenditures, we just kind of carry those forward into 26-27, just kind of assuming everything goes back to normal. Reducing those contracted services, that 6,200, by those additional dollars that the disaster pennies provided for us, which is about 1.4 million, I believe. However, we go ahead and we try to increase expenditures and prepare for the impact of increased property casualty insurance, right? Increases to our insurance of about 200,000, which is going to be in the 6,400s, and then utilities of about 400,000 were also increased going into that 26-27 year, which will be in the 6,200 contracted services, okay, of about 400,000. Also in 25-26, if you'll recall, we had to temporarily adopt about $500,000 in federal funding because of federal government closure. So we did not have a grant award for our title funding. So we have people staffed in there, so we went ahead and temporarily adopted that in the 25-26 budget. And then we've already done an amendment, I think it was October, November, once we got our grant awards. So we have backed that $500,000 out of 26-27. Dropped the vacancy factor by about $500,000, and you can see there that we would still be facing about a $2 million deficit, just rounding that 1.995 up. And that's if we do nothing, no
Yeah,
compensation increases or anything of that nature.
So let's stop there for just a second, see if anybody has any questions. We showed this to y'all in the last workshop, but just wanted to see.
So if we do nothing, I know that the little bar at the end, the bottom, it still shows that we're somewhat within policy.
Yes,
Like
we're
you
still in
said,
policy. Yeah, we're
just
around
under
21%.
25 months of
Yes.
operating.
Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm. All right. So that's where we have started. So we knew in looking at that no matter what, we were going to have to continue to do reductions. And so what you see on the far right-hand side in our last workshop, we were just asking the question, big picture, where would y'all like to see us move towards in terms of budget for Belton ISD? And so these were just long-term board priorities. They weren't adopted goals, but we've listed those on the right-hand side. That obviously it's this board's priority to balance the budget, to increase capital projects funds, stay competitive in compensation. We know that just as property casualty insurance has gone up, so has health insurance costs. So to be able to continue to look at ways to offset some of that, as well as whether it's bring down the student-teacher ratio or secondary, or support different master scheduling models at secondary. Those were some of the discussions that came out of that meeting. And so what we did was took the dollar amounts, minus balanced budget for a minute, but taking what would it look like to add the additional $1 million in capital projects? What would a 2.5% pay raise look like for our staff? So we took the long-term board priorities, and if we were to implement all of those simultaneously in 1 year, then we know we would be looking for a minimum of about $8.6 million in additional reductions going into the 26-27 school year. So as a board, you're not adopting budget assumptions. Typically, this board has done that in February. You're not required by law to adopt board assumptions, but that's been the practice of Belton. So we don't have assumptions on today's board meeting, but just wanted to show y'all that's the amount we would have to be working towards, which obviously would put us well below the appropriate amount in fund balance. The big picture of fund balance and the why behind that is when you get below that 2.5 months worth of operating expenses, what you start to see is districts struggle to make payroll. And that's why in some school districts you've seen they've actually had to go get bank loans to make their payroll. We do not want to be in a position like that. So before I jump to the next sheet, any comments or questions on that so far? Okay, all right. So I think this one,
This is basically the same financial information that we were previously looking at on the other slide. But now, moving forward then, introducing further reductions, and then trying to figure out where to land in regards to either a surplus or deficit budget. Melinda, I'll let you take it from there.
yeah. So we went to work again knowing this was on the horizon, and so we started with looking at the work out of the Budget Advisory Committee that happened the year prior. So if you'll remember again, in March of last year, talked about what was at that time called Phase 3. And so prior to even starting there, all of district departments looked once again at if you started with a zero budget and started building for 26-27 with most essential things, what additional things can we reduce? So when you see additional department budget reductions, right now that's estimated about $500,000. The adherence to staffing guidelines, that's not changing staffing guidelines. As we had talked about last year, it's adhering to the staffing guidelines. We have some campuses that are slightly overstaffed, and so it is bringing those campuses to the guidelines. So that's not an adjustment, it's everybody living within them. It's also adjustments to instructional support models, and Gabby's going to talk about what that means, and that was the Phase 3 reduction. So she's going to talk about our approach to that. As of right now, in doing all of that, we are estimating another $4 million in reductions. So that's where we are today, and I'm going to have Gabby jump into those instructional support model changes.
So when we talk about instructional support models, we think about individuals beyond the actual classroom who are supporting what's happening in the classroom. And our Budget Advisory Committee named 3 specific roles that exist within our system for consideration with reduction. And those roles include our instructional coaching team, our library services team, and our intervention team. And so I'm going to walk through each of those and explain where we have landed following a design process where we asked ourselves, what is it that we are working to achieve in these roles that prioritizes the student experience as well as the individuals who are serving in those roles and value the important work that's done there. And so I want to start with the instructional coaching role. Currently we have at a minimum 1 instructional coach on every campus. And so we worked with elementary and secondary campus leaders and teams to talk about what we were achieving in those roles. And after this process of design, made a decision to approach elementary and secondary slightly different. And the elementary level, we will be reducing in the coming school year to 6 shared instructional coaches. Those instructional coaches, the role is designed to invest in teachers and growing teacher growth at the classroom level in alignment with the instructional experiences we want. We took data for each campus and have been doing a messy puzzle to say, how might we make this work? And we, moving forward, will assign campuses to have essentially a pair where there's 6 total instructional coaches, but they will support 2 campuses in our district. They will also have time in what we call a professional learning community, or PLC, to plan for what the supports look like for those campuses who have aligned needs and a shared caseload. And so the model for elementary moving forward into the next school year will be 6 per elementary, for the whole elementary level. At the secondary, middle school, and high school, we will move to a core content lead teacher. So each campus will have 4 core content leads. These are teachers who we will invest in as leaders on campus, who will have a part of their instructional day going into peer classrooms coaching and supporting planning processes with those teachers. What that will allow us to do is, again, grow leaders within our system, but those instructional coaches also will become eligible at the secondary level for a stipend, and then also eligible for the statewide teacher raise that was implemented last year. So that's a high-level descriptor of the elementary and secondary instructional coach model. The second area of instructional support is in our library services team. We have a tremendous value on our libraries and literacy in our district. Several years ago, about 7 years ago, our district made a decision to allow for digital information specialist as a title, as well as librarian as a title. There has been a long-standing shortage of certified librarians in our state, and that decision as a district allowed us to have a certified staffed library where we could continue to prioritize literacy in our district. And so that the title, we have 2 functioning in our libraries right now, digital information specialist and librarian. So we are moving to an innovation specialist in our libraries, and that'll be at every level. And that innovation specialist will now become eligible for the state teacher raise in this shift, because not only will they be working to provide literacy services in the library, but also serving our gifted and talented students. We've identified in this process a shortage that we've had in addressing the needs of our gifted and talented students. Many of our library service team members are providing supports for gifted and talented right now. That will be a part of what happens by design of the innovation specialist role. And so we'll be making a shift through our entire system to an innovation specialist in the library, still maintaining focus on literacy, innovative practices, STEM experiences, and serving our gifted and talented students with a direct service provider. And again, it'll make those individuals eligible because they'll be the direct teacher for our gifted and talented students that will make them eligible for that teacher raise. And then the final support model is our intervention support model. And this only impacts elementary level. Each campus right now has a minimum of 1 interventionist on their campus that is supported through our local funds. Moving into the coming school year, let me tell you what the interventionists do right now. Our interventionists work alongside our classroom teachers to support targeted academic supports for students who are experiencing challenges progressing academically. That is not going to go away. We are still going to intervene with students. We will be taking a more wide approach that is shared across our grade level teachers. We will not have an interventionist role on our campuses anymore. However, we will give a teacher leader stipend, 2 per campus, 1 for a K2 teacher, 1 for a 3-5 teacher, to help with the facilitation of what we call the MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of support processes, that will ensure students still receive intervention services. So with that, again, very high level, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
A question about the instructional coaches. Currently, you said we have 1 on every campus, but since we're going to downsize to half that, what's happening with the other half? Is there a place for them?
Sure, so, so there's a couple of different options. If a campus is a Title I campus, we've been working with those campuses to review their Title I dollars, and those dollars might support them having either an interventionist or an instructional coach.
I think the question though is, I'm sorry to interrupt. Nope, the board's commitment, our commitment through this whole entire process is that this is not people are being fired and they no longer have a job in Belton ISD. So 100% of the individuals impacted by these changes will have a position available to them in Belton ISD. It might look different.
Right.
Some of them might apply for the innovation specialist and be in the library. Some might apply to be one of the 6 instructional coaches or be the teacher leaders on our secondary campuses. But every single person, we want to make sure, and we believe we can do that. We've been successful in doing that the last 2 years through attrition. Sorry, Gabby, I
That's
just want to
okay.
make sure we got to
Nope, that's totally,
what the
that's totally
question was. Okay. Other questions?
I should make sure I heard correctly. I think we all want balanced budgets, high priority. I know it is for me. I think someone said it here a little while ago, maximizing every dollar is really important. So that's what I hear is happening within the restructuring. And am I hearing this correctly, that with innovation specialists and interventionists, the changes that they'll be eligible for the funding for HB2, for TIA, and stipends? Is that right?
yes, or depending on the role.
Yeah, all right,
So
yeah.
absolutely for the teacher role, if they're serving students in the classroom for 50% of their day. TIA, yes, eligible once in the classroom, and if in the area that's designated in our system.
Thank you.
The instructional coach number, we had 1 at every campus, right? You said that a moment ago.
Minimum.
At a minimum.
Minimum. So we're dropping down to 6 elementary,
Yes, sir.
and how many secondary?
Secondary, there won't be an instructional coach. There would be 4 core content leads per campus, and they would have a stipend.
They'd be teachers
they
in the
would be
classroom.
teaching.
They'd be teachers in the classroom to get a lead teacher stipend to do that.
We're taking on an extra role.
That's correct.
Which would make them eligible for the TIA funds.
Yes, if they're
If they're
teaching in
teaching
a
in this
role that is designated for TIA, that would be correct.
And these interventionist specialists, we're not talking about dyslexia interventions. I think that's
Correct.
important to note,
That
because
will-
those are
Absolutely.
students served under generally special education
Yes,
dyslexia. So
absolutely.
those interventionists are not going away.
No.
The innovation specialists would also be eligible for TIA funds?
Yeah, so in the statewide model, librarians and nurses were not, or counselors were not recognized in that. And so by us reconsidering or clarifying the role within the library space where we had multiple titles before and shifting to innovation specialists, as well as ensuring that they are providing our services to GT students, that makes them eligible.
What happens to them salary-wise? Assuming that they get the TIA funds, do they receive less money overall at the end of the day, or will they be receiving more money because of the TIA funds?
So currently,
Changing roles.
the individuals in these positions are on a lower pay grade than the
Okay.
teacher pay schedule, so there would be a movement to the teacher pay schedule that includes the House Bill 2 increases from last year, so it'll be a little bit of an increase.
That's all good.
It's all in your vantage point. These are individuals that have worked really hard in their current roles, and these are roles that we have valued in our system. And so this is a significant change. If you're currently a media specialist on a campus, digital media person on a campus, their responsibilities will look different. If you've been in an interventionist role, you will be in a classroom. So these are significant model changes, significantly impacting staff members. And so tried to approach this in a way where we were not reducing force in terms of eliminating positions and people were having to leave the district. Would love for, these are incredible teachers, incredible leaders, would love for them to stay in the district. It would be in a slightly different role. Okay.
No, we're
Brandon.
wrapping up, so I just want to say thank you. I think I did, very impressed by the, you know, when you're going through budget reductions, it's hard and at times really emotionally defeating. But I think y'all done a great job of managing that and being respectful of the staff and then innovating through it. I mean, I think a bright side, and Gabby just mentioned it, but repeating that we're going to have GT services or someone dedicated to GT services on all of our campuses, like that's something we don't have right now. And so out of all this, there is really positive change coming through these adjustments that are being made. So I want to say thank you for that. I know there's been a lot of work that's gone into that. So.
Thank you.
There's a silver lining there somewhere.
Okay. Well, board, appreciate you. This is, again, a workshop. We're not taking action on this. Wanted to just give you an update on where we are today as we're working towards that 26-27 budget.
Okay, well, that concludes our board workshop this evening. There being no further business, we are adjourned at 5:53 p.m.